warning of potential blackouts had the New South Wales government urging people to minimise power use a couple of weeks ago. So what if the government, instead of asking nicely, was able to use energy or limit it remotely? Is it simply using tech in an intelligent way if that happens, or is it Big Brother finally coming true in the worst possible way? Joining me now is Associate Professor Roger Dargaville, Senior Lecturer and Researcher in Renewable Energy within Monash University's Civil Engineering Department. Thank you for your time. So in terms of how this was done, the obvious one would be limiting air conditioners, say at 23, 24 degrees. I'm not sure what the figure might be. Is that the obvious one? And what other elements could future governments rely on in this regard?
So there's quite a broad range of different technologies that we use in our homes that could be shifted when we use them to non-essential times. So, for example, electric hot water is something that we've had on a controlled circuit sometimes for decades in some homes. So it's not a new idea to shift the load of some of these technologies to times that are easier to meet with the generation technology. So traditionally, with coal-fired power stations, not wanting to turn them down at night, we would shift the load of the hot water to night time to bring up that demand. As we're moving to more renewables and a system dominated by solar, we'd like to see more of the load moved to the middle of the day. It's not reasonable to ask people to be walking around their homes, changing thermostats, switching switches on and off to move these loads around. So it makes a lot more sense to do it through automatic systems. So once you've got the system automated, it makes sense to have a signal coming from the market operator, a retailer, a distribution network to optimise the response of those systems to best suit the needs of the system at the time.
Okay, so you're suggesting through hot water there's an element of this already. It would be a bit of a change though, wouldn't it, if someone goes to turn down their aircon and it doesn't go down to a certain temperature? How is that set? You know, some houses feel hotter or colder in some areas. I know someone might have a unit, only one unit in the main room, and they're going, my bedroom's pretty hot even when it's at 24. Does that get problematic?
Well, if your thermostat's working, then hopefully your room is at 24 if the thermostat's set to 24. The idea is that on a hot day in particular, if your thermostat is set to, say, 19 or 20, that for a period of an hour or two, the thermostat would be lifted up to 23 or 24, and that number would be dependent on the circumstances. So your room would get slightly warmer. If the system's working well, if your house is reasonably well insulated, you may not even notice the difference. The idea is not to make people's lives intolerable, to make the house unlivable. That you wouldn't notice very much. You might be a little bit less comfortable for a short period of time. And that difference in energy consumption would be the difference between not having to take further action, such as rolling brownouts, and just having the system operating as per normal.
So when people say, but hang on, aren't lives meant to get better? We haven't had this in the past. What's the response to that? Is this just all part of a difficult energy transition? Whatever way we do it, there are going to be more renewables in the grid, and there's an agreement to reduce emissions overall. Is this just sort of sharing the load, if you like, being upfront, saying some things will get a little different, you won't have as much control, but you're advocating that this wouldn't affect lives dramatically?
The idea is to ask energy consumers to come along and be more participatory in the energy transition. Obviously, as we move to more renewables, more wind and solar, there's going to be more variability in how much available supply we have at any one point in time. The goal is to ensure the system is still secure, but to keep it 100% secure would require building a lot of batteries, a lot of additional transmission, a lot of additional capacity. We can reduce the amount of capacity and storage that needs to be built if there's more demand-side response, ability for consumers to vary how much power they use at these critical times.
So is this basically about that last 5 to 10%, that if people at any stage can turn on any appliance, that final 5 to 10% making the grid be able to always hit that peak for those peak days is what can get quite expensive, and that's what this avoids? Is that the simple way of explaining it?
Exactly right. The last few percent is very expensive to meet because that's your lowest capacity factor peaking plants, which at the moment is open cycle gas turbines, even diesel generators. Very expensive to operate because they're only being used very infrequently. So if we can minimise how much of that kind of capacity we need to have in the system, it should significantly reduce energy bills.
And could that same element be applied to nuclear power plants? So if we're talking 5 to 10% of the grid, whether it replaces this or goes on top of it, so you can still have some control on energy use in the home and nuclear, could that be the role for nuclear, that the final bit of firming gets really expensive? And while nuclear overall might be seen as more expensive, if it's just playing that smaller role, it might have a future economically within Australia?
Well, nuclear is a very different technology to renewables. It's not a peaking plant. You want to run it at sort of constant baseload because it's expensive to build. It's got a lot of thermal inertia, so you tend to run it at relatively constant output. It's certainly not the kind of technology you turn on for a couple of hours a day to meet the morning or evening peaks. So if you were to have nuclear providing baseload underneath the varying renewables, it really wouldn't change the need to still have that peaking plant or that demand side response to be able to keep the balance of supply and demand perfectly in check.
Okay, but I guess you don't have to, there's that element of how much coal goes out of it. You might have a bit more base load that sort of firms up things overall. I mean, is that at least a possibility? Will you look at the coalition's policy with interest and see whether or not you think it might make sense?
Oh, certainly with a lot of interest, but as you were discussing earlier with Perrin, the costs of nuclear do look like they're significantly higher than the equivalent system with wind, solar and storage. So in a country like Australia that doesn't have an existing nuclear program, that has plentiful renewables, the renewable option definitely looks like the cheaper option. For countries that don't have the same renewable resources, that do have existing nuclear programs, nuclear energy is a really good technology, and we don't shy away from it. But in the context of Australia, it doesn't make economic sense.
Right, more about the startup then. Okay, Roger Dargaville, appreciate your time today. Thank you.